The state of Idaho has many things to be thankful for. The scenic mountains, its farming and ranching heritage, its affordability, and its United States Senator, Mike Crapo, the Senate Finance Chairman and former banking chairman, who believes the big, beautiful bill will ultimately help every American breathe easier about themselves and the nation. From Ballard Studios in Washington, D.C., it's 13th and Park.
The hard things that are necessary, we either do it or we'll pay the price down the road.
That often is missing in politics.
We have to solve everything.
It's a nightmare.
You and I can differ, but that doesn't mean you and I cannot be friends.
I have faith in the American people.
Those are the facts.
The Illuminati, right there. Aliens could have invaded and nothing would surprise me at this point.
We went from North Korea to M&M. That's a lot, man.
What's in this tea?
Senator, great to have you with us today from the Senate studio, as I'm looking at you, and great branding behind you. So whatever happens or doesn't happen in this interview, everyone's going to know who the star of the show was because I'm seeing the name. Obviously, a lot of Americans are trying to come to grips with what the big, beautiful bill is all about. What are Americans maybe missing about what's in this bill that bottom line is going to be good for everybody?
Well, first of all, I think that the thing that most Americans are missing is truth about the bill. The attacks on the bill created a false narrative that has just perpetrated itself across America, and I think need to be set straight. The bill has been attacked as increasing the federal deficit and taking Medicaid benefits away from people, and the exact opposite is the truth. The truth is that this bill, and the final score from CBO, says that this bill reduces the deficit by $400 billion. And a second part of this is that the bill actually reduces federal spending by $1.2 trillion over the next decade, putting us on the first major step toward reforming our entitlement system and getting control over the growth of the national debt.
You would never have signed on to this bill. Given your background, the former Senate banking chair, now the Senate finance chair, you never would have said, I'm okay with this if the numbers didn't add up the way you're talking about, right?
Yeah, that is exactly right. This bill started out as an effort to extend an expiring tax bill from 2017 that would have generated a $4 trillion tax increase on Americans. And that tax increase was not a tax increase on people who make $1 billion. That's how it was attacked. 2.6 trillion of that was a tax increase on people who make less than $400,000 a year, and that's $200,000 per couple in a family.
Wow.
And most of that is on people who are in the lower and middle income tax brackets. In addition to that, it would have been a tax increase on small businesses across the country and would have been a massive impact on businesses, small and large, that are producing the jobs in this country. So it was to stop a $4 trillion tax increase. And that tax increase was turned into a deficit reduction argument by those who said that it was going to increase the deficit. The bottom line here is the core of what we started to do was to stop a $4 trillion tax increase. We did that. We added to that major tax relief for people across the country. And we did major entitlement reform on top of it. We did reform Medicaid, and we did it in a way that got rid of many waste and fraud and abuse provisions, which we can talk about if you would like to, and protected the actual benefits for whom Medicaid was intended. Those are the kinds of things that we were working on, and that's why we signed on to working on this bill.
Well, this bill also, as you know, included tremendous funding for border security, which Americans have been screaming for years, and our national defense. So it's not just about a calculation of making sure that we don't put more unfair tax burdens on Americans, we don't balloon the deficit. It was also securing our defense.
That's absolutely right, and I'm glad you brought those other 2 points up. This bill had a major border component, which has now given President Trump the financial support to close the border, which he has done.
Yeah.
I don't know if most Americans realize that we have been in a series of weeks now where there have been no illegal crossings across the border.
Wow.
It has been closed. And as far as our national defense, we have put major boosts into our national defense across the board, which is going to give us much more capacity to push back on some of the very dangerous circumstances that we are facing around the globe.
So as the chair of the Senate Finance Committee, give us some of your priorities beyond, having helped shepherd this through the process. What else is on the top of your agenda?
Well, the Finance Committee has jurisdiction in three broad areas, and there are items in each area. The first one is tax policy, and we've just talked about that. There's a ton of other tax policy that we didn't talk about yet that is in that bill, which we could, but we are working on implementing that tax policy. We are also focused on trade. That's another one of our jurisdictions. And finally, on health care in terms of entitlement health care, Medicaid and Medicare primarily. We're looking at reforms in each of those areas.
Okay, so you've been described as the stealth Senate deal maker. Is that a good description of you? In other words, you know how to kind of move things forward. And that requires, of course, Senator, that you're able to work across the aisle often with Democrats who want to align with some of the priorities you have, and you find a way to discover the common ground to make that happen.
Working in a bipartisan fashion is something that has to happen here. We did just do this one big, beautiful bill on a purely partisan basis. It's called a reconciliation process, and it's one that can get around the filibuster, but it's subject to very limited opportunities. We used the opportunity to do our tax policy and to do some Medicaid reforms that we couldn't get bipartisan support for. But now we've got to move into that bipartisan arena and find the way to get bills that can be put together and can survive a filibuster. And we're working on that in many, many areas. And like I said, our focus is going to be continuing on Medicaid and Medicare reforms. Our focus is going to be on moving into trade areas where we can find that bipartisan support. And there are many other tax policies that do have bipartisan support that we are working on.
Well, when you go home to Idaho, what do you hear most from your constituents that maybe is not macro policy, but is micro policy?
The Idahoans are concerned about those macro issues that we've already talked about, the border, defense, spending, taxes. But when you get down to right on the ground, they're worried about housing. Housing is a crisis across this country, and it's a crisis even in rural areas. One of the biggest deals that we have to work on right now is getting bipartisan housing policy across the board done. And I just came out of a markup in the banking committee where I also sit, where we did a major housing bill. We are working on areas of many individual issues for people that deal with their own individual lives. But the pieces of that make such a big difference in Idaho are in the one big beautiful bill. We doubled the child tax credit. We increased the opportunity for individuals to build their tax policy, their wages, and to strengthen their benefits in their own jobs and to increase their job opportunities. And that's what they want. They want to have a good job, they want to have a good wage, and they want to have an opportunity to get into good housing.
Well, you talked about housing. What are some of the key elements of opening up the idea of house ownership to more Americans than ever?
Well, the first thing goes right back to tax policy, where we make sure that Americans have the opportunity to get the right deductions for their housing interest, the interest they pay on their mortgages, the interest they pay on their car loans, the interest that they pay on other things, and then that they have the opportunity to build those jobs that give them the access to housing. Secondly, we need to reform the regulatory pressures. Right now, we're finding that one of the biggest cost drivers in housing is regulations. In fact, it's regulations that are interfering with the ability to build homes and to get homes constructed for people to own and work and live in, and regulations on how they can access those homes. And so reducing the regulatory burden will reduce the cost of housing. We're also seeing that there are many needs for reforms at the state and local area that we can incentivize, where zoning regulations are causing troubles and things like that. It gets down into the nitty-gritty of how do you get from a piece of land to a house built on it and get the water to that land. It's kind of the basics, but it's very complicated, and federal and state and local regulations get in the way.
You're one of the prime sponsors for the TRAPS Act. So what you talk about gets down to even consumer protection, because that's what that is.
Yes.
Could you describe what that bill is and why it's so darn important in giving people who go through or are exposed to scams the confidence that we're going to do something about it?
I'll bet there's nobody listening to this podcast who hasn't been scammed recently. Yeah. If you have a cell phone or if you have an iPad or a computer, you are subject today with constant attacks from those who are trying to scam you or trick you into paying them money. And there are many, many people across this country that fall victim to these kinds of scams. The scams are getting much more sophisticated, and they create fear in people. And the bottom line here is this bill will create a task force of federal, state, and local authorities, as well as business and other private sector entities, to look at what is the way that we can best push back on this. Part of it will be to deal with what is allowed through our telecommunications systems and how we monitor and protect them. Another part of it will be how do we put together a system that is seamless across states and private jurisdictions and business sectors to allow people to report these things and to identify the perpetrators more easily.
Will there be harsher penalties that will be included as part of this effort?
I expect that harsher penalties will come out of it. I expect an education process for people to help them understand how to defend themselves against the scams. And I expect that a way to more quickly get to the root of the scammers and find them will come out of it.
Well, Senator, all of us in life face challenges, and I know that you have faced your own challenge with cancer, your family as well, your brother, which I assume led to your inspiration to push very, very mightily, not only as an advocate for cancer protection, but you have a bill that's in play so that Congress and the rest of the nation kind of joins in this fight. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, the acronym for the bill is MCED. It's called Multi-Cancer Early Detection. And there is a technology now proven out that can, with a blood test, can identify cancers at a very early stage. And this blood test can identify dozens of different cancers at very early stages. And if we have the ability to let people have better access to this blood test, then we will get much earlier identification of cancers in people as they are developing. And as you know, the earlier you can detect a cancer, the faster you can deal with it. And in most cases, if you can detect it early enough, you can actually kill it. And so this is a critical bill. And we've got very, very broad support. This is one of those bipartisan issues that you talked about earlier that we think can make a big difference in the war on cancer.
So you're a husband, a father, and a public servant. What has taught you the most about patience?
I think my mother taught me the most about patience. The reality is, we all have someone in our lives who can tell us, calm down, relax, and help us to understand how to deal with issues. And I had wonderful parents, my mother and my father. I got to give credit to them for any kind of skills that I have right now.
So a little-known historical footnote is that back in 1989, you served as acting governor of the state of Idaho for 12 hours. Correct, right?
That's right. That's
when
right.
Governor Andrus was out of state. Now, I wanted to know, that was 12 hours. What if you had had 24 hours? Would that have been tempting maybe to have pushed something before Governor Andrus had returned?
Yeah, actually, I think another thing he said to me was, don't do anything I wouldn't do. And he was a Democrat governor, and I was a Republican leader of the Senate. And I'll tell you an interesting little story. While he was gone during that 12 hours, one of the top leaders of the state, the treasurer, I think, the state treasurer, announced his retirement and was leaving on the spot. I mean, it was kind of a quick thing, doesn't usually happen. And I could have, as governor, named his replacement.
In those 12 hours, yes.
It would not have been the replacement that the governor who had left the state would have chosen. But I chose not to do that. And so it's interesting. The reality is it would have been an incredibly fun opportunity to put a Republican into that position.
Oh, no question. So you've been married to this wonderful person for over 50 years.
Yes.
You met back at, I think, Harvard Law. What's the secret to a long marriage? Now, this has nothing to do with politics and everything to do with, we need some real life advice.
I think the secret is patience. You brought it up earlier. The reality is there will always be rough spots in any relationship. And I think the reality is also that if you just take a minute, take a deep breath and count to 10 and think about your own personal responsibility for whatever issue is present, and then try to resolve your own issues first, you can usually resolve almost everything.
Well, Senator, I really appreciate the time. We really applaud you for the service that you do every day, much of it thankless, by the way, and trying to make sure not only that the books are balancing, but that this country is on not only an even, but a good, healthy keel as we start moving into the future at a time when I think a lot of people have been nervous about the drift in this country and about our direction and our central mission.
Well, thank you very much. And, I really believe that people are nervous about the direction of our country. I'd just like to say to everyone listening, there are a lot of people here in Washington, D.C., and frankly, throughout government across the country who are committed to getting things done right. They just need to have support and prayers from everybody who wants to get these things worked out the best they can be.
We really wish you all the best. And, like you, we're big believers in America and in the future.
Thank you. Great to be with you today.
Thank you, Senator.